January 2nd, 1990. Not much happened that day. The Dow Jones hit a record 2,800. Sting of WCW joined the Four Horsemen. All My Children celebrates 20th anniversary, and skipper Alan Hale Jr. died. And on the entertainment front, Roseanne was the number one show, War of the Roses was the number one movie, and Phil Collins' Another Day in Paradise was the number one song. However, it was this day at 8:21 p.m. that I came to this world. I was a little thing at 18 inches and a quarter and 5 pounds 13 ounces, a day shy of being a New Year's 90s baby. Since then, I became much bigger. Clearly, I'm not a little guy I once was anymore. Now anyway, what I'm going on about, I'm doing something like my Australian friend Local Archive did. The Logo Year special he did was really great, and interesting to look at logos in time. If you haven't seen it, I advise you to do so. Subscribe too! Get a lot of great stuff like the Gold Mine and the Village Roadshow documentary he did, plus his own batch of logo uploads. Now back to the topic at hand. Logo Archive has given me permission to do my own Logo Year special in honor of my 27th birthday. Now come with me as we look at Logo Years, January 2nd, 1990. At this time, the 80s were wrapping up, but in those early 90s, the 80s culture still existed, whether in fashion or in logos, which will be our focus. Let's start off the big Hollywood studios of the time, beginning with Warner Brothers. Oh yes, the infamous Warner Brothers Shield. It was during this time WB was plastering logos like the big W, and I'm sure people are getting annoyed with plastering during this time. And this particular version with the Warner Communications byline will be in its final days as shortly into the new year, the byline would change to a Time Warner Company after the merger of Time Inc. and Warner Communications a week later. And in 1990, Warner Brothers didn't have the most solid year, but put out their share of hits including Presumed Innocent, number 8 on the top 10 films in 1990, and also had a Steven Seagal hit, Hard to Kill, and Goodfellas. But they also had Bonfire of the Vanities. Ugh. Anyway, some people do appreciate the Shield from a work of art perspective, but find it boring, and I can understand their complaints, especially the later versions, but I'm kind of fond of this Warner Communications version. I like the old film look it has, which fits well considering its specific shield design dates back to 1948, with this version used since 1984. And this goes good with the clouds as well. If only one complaint, the fanfare it had was underused, only appearing from time to time and would be totally phased out in the Time Warner era. Shame too, as it gave a simple logo an epic feel, like it's nothing much, but we're about to put out a great movie and we're proud of it too. Our next trip will be another legendary Hollywood studio whose best days were past. To address the elephant in the room, I couldn't find a good 16:9 original MGM logo because of plastering. Right. So anyway, best I could do is a VHS capture. Another thing to point out of Metro Goldwyn Mayer is the movie front. They didn't have a lot to write home about, so they could say about MGM in general for the past 40 years or so, and 1990 was no exception. The only real hit was the Jean-Claude Van Damme film Death Warrant. So, yeah. And it would be late in the year at that path, not to be confused that Rooster Company acquired MGM and bring chaos to the studio. But another story for another time. Anyway, I want to talk about childhood memories I had of the MGM logo as a baby and toddler. And I was scared to death of this logo. Every time that lion showed up, I was put in tears. My mother recalls stories of renting MGM tapes and taking me to another room to prevent me from being scared of that lion. which would often prove to be futile, and it kept going as a kid. Watching TV and then Lion shows up and roars, I was terrified. I've grown to like and appreciate the MGM Lion more now than I did as a youngling, but I can still get scared if I get caught off guard. And as for this logo, nothing much to say. Just a simple iconic logo of the lion doing what it does best, roaring and greeting the audience to begin the movie. And with the iconic studio logo, it really didn't need anything flashy. It served its purpose and got the job done. And with that, now we go look at its sister studio. While during the 80s, United Artists was the premier studio of MGM UA Communications, but in 1990 only saw 2 releases, Lisa, which amounted to a hill of beans, and Rocky V, which was a disappointment at the box office. And with the chaos of MGM and Path forming, UA would go dormant and not see any more releases until 1993. Even its crown jewel, the James Bond franchise, would be stuck in a gridlock. And for this logo, they took what was a good logo and shortened it, using it since 1989, just swoosh appearing and the MGM UA Communications fading in. Okay, why couldn't they take the regular logo and have the byline there? The short version doesn't leave much of an impression as the movie begins, and considering that UA barely made an impact once this version was used and went without films for a few years, coincidence? Not drawing any conclusions, but make your own. 1990 was the last decade of the 20th century, so how it fits our next logo to look at is a huge part of the 20th century, and it's quite foxy too.
Wow! Nice segue.
20th Century Fox, a studio who had a pretty good 1990. 2 films in the top 10, Die Hard 2 at 7, and Home Alone at 2, as well as having other notable releases like Marked for Death, Predator 2, and Edward Scissorhands. Of course, they had The Adventures of Ford Fairlane, but no one's perfect. Anyway, what we have is another simple logo, used since 1981, but they done it right. A cel-drawn 20th Century Fox logo, which definitely held its own over some of the more technologically advanced logos of the time. Plus, it helps the logo has a modern look. It would look pretty dated if they had used the older design. I like how the searchlights grow on the back, definitely giving it some atmosphere. And of course, the famous fanfare done by Lionel Newman. And I have to say, out of all the Fox fanfares, this one's my absolute favorite, the beginning drum solo, which I like other versions. I have to say, this is the one that makes it go juntin, juntin, dun dun dun. Also, like the part the do 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 do. Kind of gives me that feeling like you're at a baseball game and the organist plays that music when the team is winning, and it gets you all tingly inside. This logo was good in 1981 and good in 1990, showing that simplicity works if you do it right. With nice animation and a great fanfare, they pull it off. Now we step up to the pedestal and look at a nice little lady. In 1990, while Columbia Pictures didn't have any top 10 films, they would have their own notable movies that year, including Flatliners, Misery, and Awakenings. And it was during this time they were under relatively new owners at the time, Sony, but they still operated under Columbia Pictures Entertainment. Now this logo, they took the simple approach, editing out what they had been using since 1981 with the sunburst appearing behind the lady and the name appearing. But starting the previous year, they just had the torchlight appear and the studio name fading in. It's like with this, they gave the message that, hey, We don't need any flashy effects. We're Columbia Pictures. You know who we are. Now let's start the film. I think it's a shame they cut out the sunburst, which definitely added to the logo. But I will say this. I always like the atmosphere of this logo. The black and blue goes good, especially if you're watching this late at night. Just get a bag of popcorn and you be set when you watch this logo. Seeing this torchlight on our pedestal kinda gives off an Oscar vibe. And now I'm gonna get a little weird here. Seeing that Go Columbia Pictures name in a souvenir font kinda makes me crave some Kraft macaroni and cheese. I don't know, it gives off that urge of eating curved noodles of powdered cheese. It doesn't help in front of blue clouds either. And speaking of food, when I was younger, I was mesmerized by this logo, seeing the light beam out of the torch, and that child imagination thought it was spaghetti coming out of the torch. Yes, this torchlight makes me crave mac and cheese and fine Italian cuisine. But silliness aside, other than the atmosphere, it's a shame they cut out the sunburst and going to something more simple here. Like they didn't really care. And it's ironic this logo is shortened, especially considering the print logo used during this time had the sunburst. What hinders this is a lack of music. Hell, why not have an extended version of Tim Thompson's CPT fanfare? It would work because when I see this logo, the theme always plays in my head. While sadly lacking the flash that made it a good logo, I guess it did its job, which they seemed like they only cared about. And meanwhile, the sister studio was outrunning its own and jumping over its own share of hurdles. At this point, TriStar Pictures is a fledgling studio, well, pretty much throughout their existence. They had their good films here and there, but really, most of their output during this time are hardly worth mentioning, and 1990 continued the trend, though unlike its sister studio Columbia, TriStar did have a top 10 film, Kuroko's Total Recall at 5, and they did have Look Who's Talking 2, which was a hit despite being a cash grab, and The Freshman, which was favorably received. Now, saying all this is one of my favorite movie logos of all time. Just totally epic on how it's done. That dark, foggy background, the Pegasus running towards the screen, jumping over a T and flying away, and the end result, the Pegasus of the pyramid, is a photo finish. Like those when you see the jogger crossing a finish line. A proud, monumental achievement. And that orchestrated music by Dave Grusin works wonderfully, too. Starting off nice and quiet when a horse gallops into view, and going to a louder or more triumphant theme when it jumps over the T, and ends so sweetly on the end result too. And what I think makes a great movie logo is one that plays so good, it gets you excited to see the movie that's coming up. And TriStar excelled at this with flying colors. With a nice concept, great music, and good CGI in 1984, and still look good in 1990, and holds up well today, this, my friends, is how you do a movie logo. Yes, this is a logo featured in Still Magnolias, a sad little film, but damn does it get you pumped to see a tragic film about Julia Roberts dying a diabetic death. Great job all round. And 1990 would also prove to be a huge milestone for the next company about to be covered. "1990 was a big year for Universal Studios, as the studio celebrated its 75th anniversary, being one of the longest running studios around. And in the movie front, 2 top 10 hits with Back to the Future 3 at 6 and Kindergarten Cop at 10, and other notable Universal films include Darkman, Child's Play 2, Mo Better Blues, Tremors, and the first NC-17 movie, Henry and June. While a little later in the year, they would have a newer logo animated with CGI to celebrate the anniversary. The first few months would have the zooming globe, which had been used in films since 1963. 27 years, folks! While it definitely was the tops in the 1960s, it didn't manage to hold its own well in the 80s. The zooming in on a globe, the Van Allen bells, and a universal name appearing just somehow worked. And watching that globe is just fascinating for some reason. I don't know why, maybe that timeless look, but the fact it still looked good for its duration proved to be a testament on the designers of this logo. It really didn't have any music used for it, but didn't really need it, since the silence worked as well as the opening soundtracks of the films. They just fit. While it was a good logo for as long as it was used, Universal definitely made the right call replacing it in 1990. Now we go into the earth and right into the mountains. The Paramountains! Well, Paramountain. Paramount Pictures had a #1 film in 1990, Ghost, as well as having other successful films such as Days of Thunder, The Hunt for Red October, Another 48 Hours, even The Godfather Part 3, despite it being classified as a weak sequel, made a profit. For the logo, what we have is one of the more technologically advanced logos of the time. While the mount itself and scenery is a model, the skies, the Paramount name, and byline are all computer effects, and a nice mix of them too. The skies and Paramount name giving off that nice late 80s vibe. And the mountain scenery looks good too, with the attention to details on a lake, which gives off the impression that I'm exploring this nice land as I approach the mountain. But this mountain, I have one big complaint, and that will be the Paramount Communications byline being gold. It doesn't mix well with the logo, especially since the name and the stars are white. Later on in the year, Paramount changed the byline to white, and it looks much better. And of course, a nice orchestrated fanfare, which would unfortunately be underused, especially once the Paramount Communications era began. Shame. Now time to take a trip to Disneyland.
Joe Montana, you and the San Francisco 49ers just won the Super Bowl. What are you going to do next?
We're going to Disneyland!
1990 wasn't particularly impressive for Walt Disney Pictures. Their two releases that year were DuckTales the movie, Treasure of the Lost Lamp, an unsuccessful attempt at starting a movie franchise from a successful TV series, and The Rescuers Down Under, despite making a profit, was regarded as a weak sequel to the original Rescuers. But as for the logo, it fits pretty well at the time period. Something about watching Castle form and listening to that When You Wish Upon a Star theme. This is one of those logos that makes you think you're about to enjoy another wonderful product from Disney. Despite the lukewarm reception to two films released that year, the logo does its job well. And with that, we look at another Disney division that fared a little better than the family department. Disney's adult division, Touchstone Pictures, did better than the Walt Disney name in 1990. For starters, they had Pretty Woman, number 3 at the highest grossing films that year, and also had success of 3 Men and a Little Lady, Dick Tracy, despite it not being a big franchise they wanted it to be, and Green Card. And also worth mentioning this year would see releases from another newly formed adult division from Disney, Hollywood Pictures, another studio worthy of a rise and fall in the future. Oh heck, you could also say same for Touchstone too. Anyway, so far, 1990 has made use of a lot of cel anime logos, as you notice the pattern here, and Touchstone is part of the trend. I like how it starts off as a snake forming into the circle with the company name following, and while the lighting isn't the best, it is fun to watch. The music is a little ominous, especially how dark the logo is, but it fits well. It's an alright cel anime logo. Now we go into more smaller independents and other production companies. Orion Pictures was not sitting well in 1990. After a dismal 1989, 1990 was much better as their movie input that year hardly had anything worth mentioning or seeing, and affected their bottom line too. They did happen to have one saving grace, Dances with Wolves, not only number 4 in the highest grossing films that year, but the Oscar winner for Best Picture. But it was too low too late for Orion, who would enter bankruptcy in a couple more years, and I can't say their logo is much better. Good enough when it debuted in 1980, but it's definitely showing its age in 1990 with CGI logos coming in, and of course the cell animated logos look much better than this at this point. But of course the money they were losing, it's not like you can expect them to do any better doing this tumultuous time, but there is one saving grace, that nice jingly synth music. With Orion faltering, we got 2 rising independents to look at now. "11 years old at this point in time, Miramax was starting to stand up on its own as an up-and-coming independent studio. 1990 had several notable releases such as Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down, The Cook, The Thief, His Wife and Her Lover, Mr. and Mrs. Bridge, and The Grifters. Again, constant plastering causes trouble. I can get a 16:9 1987 Miramax logo in some places, but not the Presents version like used in 1990, so have to go 4:3 again. So here, we have a nice looking logo. Just the way the animation is, it gives off a dark but calm and soothing atmosphere, especially at the end, and having that music definitely helps with that too. Plus, I like the presents used in the early years here. Gives off that late 80s feel well. And with Miramax on the rise, we have another independent studio that was established at this point, and it's definitely going on to bigger things in 1990. During this time, New Line Cinema was an established independent studio with the Nightmare on Elm Street series, but it was in 1990 they would add another series under their name. The live-action Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movies were released that year, grossing enough to become the number 9 highest-grossing film that year. They also had a couple sequels later on, and also, this year also had a release of the comedy House Party with the rap duo Kid and Play, which also had a few sequels as well. Plus, that year, they teamed up with Kuroko to form 7 Arts, which distributed the latter's low-budget films, none of which clicked with critics or audiences. Anyway, well, I think this logo is simple, but it's neat to watch. I like watching the falling film strips as the square falls, and ones that just fall into the backgrounds, the nice details the logo forms, and gives off that nice glow at the end. Having music would have been nice, but the opening theme we ever use goes good with it. Now some of the more independent studios covered, now we'll end our trip with a look at a few production companies doing what they can to earn their stake. Oh yes, Kuroko, who despite having the Rambo series was skating on thin ice in 1990 due to having very few hits outside that series, and of course their infamous overspending. But in 1990, they did have Total Recall, which gave TriStar their top 10 hit that year, would easily begin their peak success, which they would have more blockbusters in the early 90s before the money they tossed out would spell their doom in a short few years. And for their logo, again, can you say awesome? Seeing the laser coming out and forming a big metallic multi-curve C, the wind tunnel coming out, and finally resting in place is one fit for the ages. And that theme by Jerry Goldsmith, with the laser sounds and some of the electronic bits heard during a wind tunnel, this is one logo that got you pumped to see an over-the-top action film, whether it had Stallone or Schwarzenegger. And combine that with the TriStar logo, made one badass combination, one that in 1990 was rarely seen, at least on video, due to IVE Live's habits of cutting the Pegasus out. I can only imagine sitting in a movie theater, watching this combo while chowing down my popcorn, and have both these play. I would probably be sitting at the edge of my seat shouting, "Hell yeah!" as I get so pumped I throw my popcorn over everyone, getting glares from other moviegoers who are making a mess and being obnoxious, but I can't help it. This is a great combo. But of course, by themselves, they do get you pretty excited, and I can easily say that the Laser Kuroko logo is one of the best. With Kuroko rising and falling, Ron Howard and Brian Grazer's production company is rising pretty well. Imagine that.
Boo! You suck!
I know, bad pun. Let's just move on. The production company of Howard and Grazer was an up-and-comer in 1990, for the most part teaming up with Universal. Their 1990 slate had a couple of misses, like the Johnny Depp film Cry Baby and a Dana Carvey vehicle Opportunity Knocks. But they had Prom Child and Kindergarten Cop to mend those wounds. Anyway, I think this is a pretty underrated logo, not widely known due to it being seen at the end credits as per Universal practice of the time, but I think it's mesmerizing. Seeing the shimmering reflection below and the imagined name rising out of it and shining, it kind of gives me this feeling as I'm about to go to sleep and enter a nice dream world. Because of that, when I see this logo, it's comforting to say the least. Try watching this if you're in a bad mood and see if you strangely feel better. No music here, but it definitely helps in its favor. Anyway, we'll move on to another well-known Universal partner. Steven Spielberg's famous production company had a bit of a mixed 1990. Joe vs. the Volcano flopped, as did Gremlins 2 The New Batch, but did find an audience later on and is debatably better than the original. But they had success with Back to the Future Part 3 and Arachnophobia, the first film to be released under the newly formed adult division of Disney, Hollywood Pictures. Thoughts on the logo. It's easy to see why Spielberg chose to have an homage to E.T., as it's easily one of the most iconic movies to come from the company. It's definitely well suited too, as we all watch E.T. as younglings, watching Elliot fly on that bike with E.T. while on the run from the authorities, going past the moon. A nice magical moment in movies if there ever was one. That Amblin logo captures that perfectly, bringing back vivid memories of the most iconic moments in cinema history. And seeing the way the Amblin name comes in makes you think LA is cycling to make that name come in. Just beautifully done. And with this, we have two more up-and-coming production companies to look at. Just 2 years old at this point, Morgan Creek was still new to the film scene in 1990, having a successful debut of Young Guns in its first year of existence. And while their run wasn't without its valleys, they had their peaks. They were still a time away from dropping bomb after bomb. If you watch the rise and fall of Morgan Creek, you know what I mean. 1990 was one of those early up and down years. While Nightbreed and Coupe de Ville didn't amount to much, they did earn a profit of Young Guns 2, The Exorcist 3, and Pacific Heights. Logo-wise, though, This isn't really good. I did kind of like the beginning of the Extra Creek, but that's about it. The animation is too simple and plain. It just looks cheap. Maybe not too surprising considering it's this James C. Robinson we're talking about here. Not a film veteran, but he does know the automotive business. But still, their later logos had more effort put into them, but just looks like they made us in 5 minutes, and it had a theme only seen on Renegades or Enemies of Love Story, with the creek noises and chiming bells, but doesn't really add anything to the logo, doesn't give that moving water feeling because of how empty the creek looks. Just barrel off the film's opening soundtrack. If they had more detail, it still wouldn't have been anything great, but might have been salvageable. Not a failure, but definitely nothing good, or even average. Just a poor attempt from an upstart company, now with one more company to go. Castle Rock Entertainment, coming from the meathead Rob Reiner, was still a relative newcomer to the movie industry in 1990. 3 years old at the point, and last year releasing his first 2 films, one of which being When Harry Met Sally, which was a winner at the box office, and that boded well for Castle Rock as they entered a new decade. But in the beginning of the 90s, while some of their output wasn't the most successful, they did strike gold with Misery, based on a Stephen King novel, and Castle Rock produced more films based on Stephen King books later on. And from the beginning, Castle Rock is in a good position to make it, with backing from Columbia Pictures, who distributed their films, and a Canadian company, Nelson Entertainment, a definite advantage to be backed by a major Hollywood studio. And now for their iconic lighthouse. This wasn't the first time the lighthouse logo was seen, as it appeared on TV pilots back in the late 80s, but this was their first theatrical logo, and definitely a good one here. Not a too shabby effort. The light is a little wobbly, and there's that piece of land not attached to the water, but I like the concept and its good cell animation. And I like the orange and black color scheme, kinda giving off feelings of watching a sunset as evening appears. I know it doesn't make sense considering a sun rises in the logo, but the sun is white here and it kinda looks like the moon, so it gives off that vibe. But it's beautiful to look at. And Mark Shaman did a good job in the theme too, the piano solo going to the synth part, especially the jingles at the end, always tickles my ears. And this ends our special, looking at the logos used during January 2nd, 1990. I thank you all for watching, and before I go, I want to make a quick plug. Steven Cesar is out working on a Rise and Fall of Deke, his own solo Rise and Fall coming early this year. Check it out on SC Media Works. And if you're not subscribed to his channel, do it now. Great content there. You'll have fun watching his stuff. And speaking of solo Rise and Falls, I'm doing one myself. Come with me as we take a look at 2 ambitious British brothers who took their small company and took over their native England before conquering the world and becoming one of Nintendo's top developers. They made classic games in 4 generations of Nintendo consoles and became their top dog. But when they jumped ship to Microsoft, it just became another company. Yes sir, I'm talking about the Rise and Fall of Rare. Keep an eye out on it on SC Media Works. And for all my subscribers, or who just happen to be digging around that weird part of YouTube and for some reason found this video, thank you all for watching. Thank you all for the support I've gotten from the last few years. This company would be dead in the water without you all. This community has a lot of great people and I consider them friends. And of course, I thank you for helping me celebrate my 27th birthday. And thank God for everything, helping me better as a human being, because all we can do is be better than our past selves. And thanks for joining me. I'll see you all whenever.